Hello and welcome. I am Kimberly Santini and I paint my way through the world. I'm a painter based out of Michigan. I've been working full time in my studio since 2001. I'm lucky enough to have a home studio and I sell directly to collectors via online presence as well as with gallery representation across the country. I also have a pretty comprehensive collection of learning materials, both free, tuition-based, a subscription program, and in-person learning experiences. I'm deeply connected with animal and nature or natural life forms, integrating them in imaginative ways that speak to connected systems and balance. I work in acrylic on panels, but I'm currently learning oil paints, which I'll talk about later. All of the images up until the very end are going to be acrylic paintings done on these panels. While I have a BFA in painting, it's really my BA in art history, which I earned concurrently, that has served me best. Through studying art history and learning the critical thinking and analysis involved, I was able to apply similar approaches to studying my own work, comparing it to what I wanted to create, and setting forth to do so. I've been primarily self-taught since graduating college in the late 1980s. I've sought out different learning experiences, whether they be in-person workshops, online experiences, books, YouTube videos, what have you. I've been able to study with some pretty phenomenal artists. Those who are most influential on my current work are Lynn Whipple, Stanka Kordick, Anna Seams, Stuart Shills, Zoe Frank, Felicia Forte, and Alyssa Monks. When I study with another artist, I'm not just absorbing their technique, but I'm trying to learn how they frame possibilities and how they problem solve. I don't want to learn how to paint like them, but I really do want to learn how their thinking informs decision making. I can then apply that mindset to my own work as I pursue the exploration of my own curiosities. So, what do I paint? Well, I primarily paint animals as vessels carrying their environment, or at least that's what I've been obsessed with lately. I don't paint these in a literal fashion, though. Tight representation or tight realism doesn't hook me the same way that loose, expressive depictions do. Particularly since the advent of smartphones and digital photography, I wonder why I would want to paint something that a camera or another tool might be able to capture. I also am a huge fan of narratives and prefer my work to speak in some way to the magic of a good storyline instead of a specific frozen moment in time. So I intentionally build ethereal spaces in my paintings that encourage the viewer to build their own plot. What is happening here? Can the viewer make sense of this arrangement and where it might lead them? How did this process come about? Well, during the pandemic, my mentor at the time, Anna Seams, encouraged me to do lots of drawings as a way of connecting with what I was feeling. I started with the Leda and the Swan storyline, again, because I like my work to have a narrative. And that storyline or that myth felt like it was a paradox of beauty and terror, which seemed to be a really good metaphor for what was playing out in the world at that moment in time. As I began to draw more and more incarnations of Leda and the Swan, Leda became more and more prominent in the drawings, and eventually the swan disappeared. I ended up with these drawings, which I call Psyche, and you have two different ones here. The drawings were done on 9x12 pieces of paper, similar to the image that you see on the left. The image on the right is a detail of the bulk of the design on another drawing, and this detail is blown up from approximately 1.5 inches high. So I called these drawings Psyche drawings, or the Psyche series, as they represented what I was feeling or moving through as the pandemic enmeshed the entirety of the world. Eventually, I realized they were also emblematic of the general human experience at this time. I did hundreds of these drawings. And the root process of what these drawings was, or how I created these drawings, was a process that I ended up naming Create, Destroy, Rebuild. I basically created a face, then I destroyed it in some way, and then I rebuilt it by teasing out a small section. This create, destroy, rebuild cycle was such a powerful and healing way of expression to me that I asked myself, how might I bring the create, destroy, rebuild to my paintings? So, in other words, utilizing or discovering a process that I really loved with vine charcoal and a few other materials on paper gave me the opportunity to then build, explore, and examine how I might use that same process in my paintings with completely different tools. This is a great example of how explorations tangential to what we consider our main work, that being an exploration in drawing that is tangential to my paintings, can inform or help us to expand in authentic ways. Create, Destroy, Rebuild became part of my must-haves, and I began using a variety of ways to disrupt or interrupt my subjects while still allowing them to possess some aspect of literal or molded form. This painting is titled Earth and Moon, and I allowed each of the two horses to encompass the color palette, textures, and feeling of both of those separate planetary objects. For the past 5 years, I've been working in a series that I call The Talisman. These paintings are inspired by the animals I dream of and encounter in real life. The animals are woven with elements of nature selected specifically because they reflect something of significance to me. Perhaps a particular experience or memory, the season or weather, current events, etc. This combination of animal with organic results in a painting that speaks symbolically to this moment in time or my accumulated experiences up to a certain point in my life. I've also cultivated a collection of visuals that mean very specific things to me. I don't care if the viewer knows how to interpret them, but I lean into this vocabulary as a way of adding additional layers of meaning to my work. I pull from 2 essential basic practices as an idea progresses in a painting. One of those is a list of what I call my must-haves. My must-haves is a list of basic concepts or elements that I believe and exciting to me painting must possess. I've spent years paying attention to what moves me in life and art and building connections between those things, ultimately identifying the concepts in my must-haves list. The image on the left is from about 2017 when I first started tracking and paying attention to things that could be must-haves. Initially, I had pages of notes in my journal, which eventually, over the period of time, got distilled to the 5 main concepts that you see in the image on the right. And actually, this image is from a year ago, and I have been thinking lately that I need to revisit this and reevaluate and rewrite my must-haves because I'm a very different creator and focused on different things now than I was 12 months ago. So it's important to also point out that a must-haves list is not a static or clearly defined unilateral thing, but an awareness that you carry through your career as a creative. The other thing that I use as a way to spin or grow new work from old is the concept of what-ifs. We all work on a painting and we find ourselves getting to a crossroads, and you can choose to go left or you can go right. If you are working representationally or realistically, that choice is already predefined for you, based on the replication of the various effects that you see in your setup or your subject. However, when you are working intuitively, expressively, improvisationally, impulsively, like I do, that option, that choice of going left or right, is not really defined in any particular way. I tend to choose the path that feels the most exciting at that moment in time because I'm working on that painting, and that painting is having a conversation with me. It is telling me, if I listen to it carefully enough, it is telling me exactly what it needs. It's asking for that through my intuition and impulsive decision making. But what happens when I have multiple what ifs during the course of a painting's progression and I don't get to chase all of them? Well, that's a super easy answer. I set aside the ones that I don't get to chase and I reserve them for total and complete focus in a future painting. And what you see here are two paintings that are connected by the what if as to how I might utilize the shape of a pine tree or an evergreen to carve out or enhance the shape of bear. The surface treatment or the shape treatment of these pine trees is very different. In the piece on the left, those pine trees are almost like a reflection, as if Bear herself were a sphere and she was reflecting or internalizing a particular scene or landscape. The what if used in the painting on the right was, what if I use the stretching, the upward growth, the thrust of these trees as a way to speak to the solidity of Bear's form and to make you feel tall or solid or stretched out. And so just by virtue of thinking about two different ways in which I can embrace and lean into the concept of the shape of a tree, I've created two completely what ifs and two completely different paintings that are still connected with a common idea. I also work impulsively and intuitively, like I mentioned, and I listen. I pay attention to my body's response to ideas and what is playing out in the painting. I try not to let things get too precious, and I chase down the answer to a what if when it shows up, using the one that feels the most exciting. This means I never know where a painting is going to land. I start with an idea like, what if I used organic growth to define the silhouetted edge of an animal, and I let it evolve from there. In this particular in-process painting, Morning Glory, that was my basic idea that I started with. How might I utilize a mass of organic growth to define an outer edge of an animal shape? So I have had fox and florals on the brain. I just filmed a new online course that is all about colliding and weaving fox and florals together. This course is going to be available. Enrollment starts on May 14th of 2025, and the class is available through Cara Bullock Art School. But as I was working on the demo paintings and we were filming this course, a what if bubbled up that I couldn't chase. That being the one I just shared with you about using the mass of organic growth to actually carve out the shape or pinpoint or tease out the shape of an animal silhouette. So this is the resulting painting here. I tabled that what if while we were filming the course and saved it for later. And when I got into my studio, that was what I opted to try and do. The first piece I got when I got back. So let me walk you through the process of the making of Morning Glory to this particular point. So I do use reference photos at the beginning or the onset of a painting. I think it's really important, if you are going to use photographs, that you use photographs that have or that are copyright free. There are a multitude of sites online that include copyright-free imagery free to use. Please do not use photographs that have been published or printed or that you find online in any way other than via a copyright-free site. So I have my fox photo here on the left, and I've chosen this particular photo because of the shape and the body language of fox. She's got a really beautiful curved outer edge on that left-hand side, and that feels like it would be the perfect mechanism for which to pursue this what if. The photo on the right is from my own personal reference library, and I chose this photo specifically because the curvature of the morning glory on the armature or the trellis is very close to or matches the curvature in the fox. So simply by rotating this image, this resource image 90 degrees to the left, I'm going to already have a connection between my photo of the fox and my photo of the morning glories. And I actually don't even call these photos reference photos in my own practice. I call them resource photos for a very specific reason. A reference photo in my head is meant to be replicated. A resource photo in my head is a photo that contains several elements that I would like to extract, put into my painting, and then respond to. So that is why I call these resource photos. I'm not planning to perfectly replicate or representationally recreate either of these photos. I'm bringing them together and creating an entirely new space and narrative in response to those. So the image on the left is where I started. This is an 18 by 24 piece of hardboard. It is a flat panel, it's a wood composite panel, and I'm working directly on it. I have not gessoed it, I have simply started to draw directly on it. And I'm using a couple different colors of water-soluble colored pencils, along with a blue Stabilo All pencil. And I start with a contour drawing. If you looked at my must-haves list, you may have noticed that the spectrum between line and modeled form is one of my must-haves. So it's really important to me that from the very beginning, I'm thinking about these must-haves and integrating some of these elements that I feel are critical to the success of a piece. I start with a contour drawing, and I get that down on the panel, and then I'm going to lock that in or lock that drawing in behind an isolation coat medium, which keeps the lines from moving or getting picked up by my acrylic paint. But that isolation coat medium is also going to coat this panel really well and ready it for subsequent layers of paint. You can see that I have my resource photo on my iPad there, on my easel tray, and I have begun the building of this new piece. On the right, you can see a little bit of detail. As I begin to block her in with my paints, I'm using a very wide brush, and I'm starting from my focal point, moving outwards. At the starting point, I'm really not thinking about a literal depiction of the colors or the shapes as they presented in either of the resources. I'm beginning to step into the mood of the painting and play with arbitrary sorts of decisions. This is also part of my intuitive approach to work or my improvisational approach to painting. What if the darkness of her facial mask, what if that is actually a sliver of night sky or midnight sky? And how might that integrate with a sky-like background in general and just having fox float over top of that? So the what-ifs are always bubbling up. They are always asking for a little bit of attention, and sometimes I choose to honor them. Sometimes I set them aside and hold on to them for a later piece. So here, as we move through these slides, you're going to see the prior version on the left-hand side and the continuation of the piece on the right. So after I've blocked in my focal point or started to really establish my value relationship in the focal point, I expand from that outwards to the edges of the painting. I am not using my contour lines or my drawings as a specific outline that I need to put very precise marks inside of. I'm using those lines as suggested spaces, and I'm putting really loose, juicy marks in over top of them. Also, every time I go back to my palette, I'm mixing with my brush and I'm creating a subtle, nuanced step away from the mark that I just made. Hence the tonal similarity of all of the marks that you see here. They were all made in succession, one after the other, just pushing or moving my puddle of paint towards green or purple or a lighter value or a darker value. At this point, I have realized that I've lost the bulk of my line work, which is fine to me. I can always go back in and draw and add more. And so I have. I've gone in and more carefully drawn Fox. I have spent some time being a bit more precise with the correct placement of her features as well as her profile. And I've broken that big negative space in the chest area. I've broken into that with some interesting line work that feels like it could be fur-like. It could also be a vine or a stem with multiple leaves on it. As I'm working in putting line work and marks down on the surface, I'm marrying the two objects that I am colliding in my painting, marrying them together by identifying similarities. Maybe the similarities are in a colorway, maybe the similarities are in shapes or energy of movement, but I'm paying attention to that as I move into or more deeply into the painting process. And now I'm starting to think about that energetic thrust and the design component of creating a dark value pathway that is going to begin at that lower edge and find that curvature of Fox's body and really carve her shape out like my original What If challenge presented. I also decided that I really loved some of the bits of orange that remain in the painting on the left-hand side. Those sections that are reading as a umber or sienna, a lighter one, that's actually the naked panel showing through all the layers of marks. I call these aspects peekaboo pockets, and they're really important to me because they create a sort of jittery energy to the painting that I couldn't orchestrate with very carefully precise placed marks. The peekaboo pockets reveal the history of mark making and all of the different layers that will accumulatively build in this piece and ultimately make the end painting really exciting. So I really loved those oranges, and I decided that I wanted to put a little bit of them in to her face and play with the shape of her nose. It felt, the mask as I had it as a slice of midnight sky, felt too dark, too heavy, and just really wasn't giving the sensibility that this was a living creature in any way. So I popped some of that orange in. I also started to add some deeper purples or deeper valued purples to sort of correlate or add nuance or bounce to the lighter violets that were in the painting, and continued to find my way through the shape of Fox and her collision with the growth. And here on the right, you have a version of her where I've wiped all my chalk lines off to assess the overall design, my value balance, and all of the nuances in the marks. The auditions that I've put in, these white lines that you see in some of these painting versions, are simply a piece of chalkboard chalk. As long as your painting is dry, you can absolutely use that to mark on the surface of acrylics. And it's one of my favorite tools or favorite things to do because it gives me the opportunity to audition placement of shapes and objects and shifts to the piece directly on the surface. I can put my lines down in chalk and then use those guidelines for more careful placement of painted marks. And then when the paint is dry, remove those white lines and see the design a bit more cleanly. Now in this slide, we have a little bit something different happening here on the right-hand side. What's on the right-hand side is a new resource image. And this is a resource image that I made with a digital drawing tool called Procreate. And essentially what I did is I was looking at this painting and I really loved where she was at, but she needed a little bit more oomph. There wasn't anything here that felt super exciting to me or felt like it was a really clear direction. I knew I wanted more leaves. I didn't want Fox and the Morning Glory to just be contained in the center of the painting. I needed them to escape. I wanted to, or I was curious about what would happen if I lost some edges of Fox and allowed that growth to spill out. So my initial what if that I started with is evolving and changing, and that's okay. That's part of working intuitively. You start to work with an idea and you begin to see different ways in which that idea can be manifested or grown. And so, I try not to let the painting get so special or sacred or so committed to that initial what if that I don't hear subsequent ones that come up. Clearly, this possibility that I'm exploring here on the right is a big variant or a deviation from my starting point, but it feels super, super exciting to me. And this is the direction that I want to go with the piece. So I'm going to go with it. But before I show you how I painted it, I do want to show you how I built this resource. I imported a photo of the painting as she currently sat into Procreate. And then I layered this resource photo, which is another one of mine, over top of her and used the eraser tool to erase sections of the Morning Glory photo, revealing passages of the painting as peekaboo pockets underneath. So that's how I built this resource, and this is how I then responded to it with paint. Because I am so much more comfortable decision making or making decisions at the easel with a paintbrush in my hand, and I know that I make stronger decisions that have more clarity and discernment with that brush in my hand than I do with a stylus or when I'm working on a screen, I lean into my active painting process as a way to extract the elements from this resource on the left, integrate them into the painting, and then respond to them and allow the painting to grow or evolve into something distinctly different and uniquely of her own personality. And this is where the piece is currently sat. So she's not finished. I have a really lovely dark value pathway, but I need to now create a lighter value pathway that is going to be in opposition to that, or that is going to help drive the viewer's eye straight to her profile and perhaps those pinkish morning glories that I have, the triangle of them, and the upper section. I don't have an answer as to how I'm going to do this yet, but I'm going to sit with her and I'm going to study her for a bit. I may take her into Procreate and try or audition some changes with a paintbrush tool, or I may choose to erase aspects of the painting or simplify them in Procreate. But I'm going to lean into the digital tool as a way of exploring radical shifts to the painting, and that will give me a guide point or a resource when I go in and begin to make marks on her again. In addition to the acrylic paintings, I've been learning to oil paint, and I've been working on that for the last year. I really wanted to better understand oil painting and what the medium brought to my ideas, and also how creating my paintings in oils, which is a very different medium than acrylics, how creating my paintings in oils would alter or give me the opportunity to do very different things with the surface. So I took an introduction to oil painting course, and then I set myself up to begin making small oil painted studies of my larger acrylic paintings. And these have taught me quite a bit technique-wise, but they've also given me some pretty solid aha moments. And I'm going to take you through just a few of those. So in these two slides here, the painting on the left is an acrylic painting. It's an 24 by 30 inch painting on panel. And the study on the right is roughly 8 by 10 inches. And it's done in oil paints on Stonehenge oil paper. The act of doing the oil study and doing it in a smaller scale, I'm not choosing to replicate exactly what I did. What I'm doing is I'm simplifying it. I'm simplifying the complex composition from the larger painting, and in the process, I get to distill the design into more easily read shapes. This really helps me to see how I can improve my paintings from the design up. I'm also, during that distillation process, giving myself permission to try out some different what-ifs. And in this particular example, you can really see how shifting the chroma in that dark background space and allowing the blue sky to create a counter diagonal to the thrust of the fox creates or results in a far more dynamic painting and the end result. This kind of awareness that I'm learning as I'm doing these studies isn't just going to serve me with the oil painting work, but it's going to inform all of the decision making that all the decision making in all of my work, no matter the media. Line is also a really key component of my work, and I ache for line. And you can see a lot of it in the acrylic painting on the left. It's not as simple to create line work in oil paints as it is for me with my acrylics. With my acrylic paints, I can just grab a mark making tool or even just a paintbrush, and I can carve line in or place line in over top of the dry layers of paint very easily and very quickly. I can't do that in oil. The line work has to be pre-planned, part of the design, before I put heavier applications of paint in, or else I'm just going to end up with muck. This means that when I'm painting with my oils, I'm quite a bit more discerning with the line and how I use it than I am in acrylic. And that has asked me to think about line and the integration of line and form in an entirely new way and as the painting progresses. And that's a good thing. Any chance I have to juggle up or question my processes and really rethink them while also being able to concretely see what that rethink or that shift is going to enable me to do in my work is a really positive one. So line and my constant desire for it in my work has also, I'm realizing, impacted how I think of edges. So the larger image here on the right is my acrylic painting. There is an awful lot of both drawn and scribbled line work in this, as well as painted line work. And the little insert here on the left is my oil painted version where I've really simplified things. And in this particular painting, I was beginning to think about line not as a hard edge or a specific shape or even an opportunity for me to do a lot of window painting or negative space painting and creating nuance like you see in the bottom mid section of the acrylic painting, but thinking of line as an opportunity to create transitory spaces as opposed to hard stops. And I realized that oil paints really lend themselves to this sort of softness in some pretty amazing ways. The other thing that oil painting does is it provides the opportunity for me to put a mark down and manipulate it over time. Both manipulation immediately once it's on the surface, as well as when adjacent marks are laid in. This is a huge shift over acrylic, where I put that mark down and it is dry in approximately 1 to 2 minutes, and I really don't have much time at all to rework what's situated or what's put down on my acrylic surfaces. Because of that, and because of the whole decision making or the way I approach my acrylic paintings, I actually layer marks over top of each other in rapid succession until the accumulation of them is correct. So this enables me to build up passages that are rich with history and layers in my acrylic paintings. And that's something that I really, really value and appreciate. It's one of my must-haves. But it isn't something that I can do right now in oil painting. My skill level, my technique, my comfort level with the oil paints is not yet enabling me to do that. Therefore, I'm able to really, there's a big difference in the space between the mindset of getting the right mark down and manipulating that or relocating that adjacent to another right mark in oil painting versus the approach of putting a mark down in acrylic, assessing, putting another one over top, assessing, and going back and forth like that. So another opportunity to reframe the way I think and question whether or not my processes need to be revised, or I can bring some different techniques into my acrylic paintings at times, or do I really want to hone my oil painting skills and get to that particular level with my oil paints? I don't know where I'm going with my oil painting practice, or even if I ever will shift to painting exclusively in oil paints. But that doesn't matter to me. What does matter is that I'm mining the learning process of learning to paint in oils for a better understanding of what I want to say with my art. And once I have that clarity, I can then specifically choose my tools and my processes that allow me to do so. For me, it's not about commitment to a particular medium or methodology. It's all about leveling up what I have in my toolbox so that as more is revealed to me personally in my day-to-day life, I continue to have a reserve of exciting and fresh ways to speak to it in my art. I share my whole studio practice very transparently inside the tuition-based tiers of my Patreon. This is a subscriber-based community with all sorts of different engagement and content that is structured to show students how I'm continually raising the bar, all of the various explorations and questioning that's happening at my easel, at my drawing table, with my oils, with my acrylics. There's also prompts and very specific exercises that are designed to help students take these examples and integrate them into their own studio practice. We also have lots of conversation about intuitive work and impulsive work and improvisation and using awarenesses to somatic, knee-jerk, gut sorts of responses as a mechanism for identifying the things that are uniquely important to your own personal voice. My students inside the Magic Space, which is what I call the Patreon, they're developing their own creative voices and making artwork that looks distinctively like their own, while learning how to question, analyze, and continue to pursue personal growth just like I do. You are welcome to take a peek at some of the content inside my Patreon under either the At the Easel tier, which gets you 2 to 3 videos every month, or the Independent Study tier, which gets you 2 to 3 videos every month, plus a good chunk of studio vlog content, which is very in-depth sharing of things like my oil painting process, as well as the integration of what-ifs and must-haves in a much deeper level than what At the Easel gets. as well as the independent study tier gets a singular 90-minute live event with me every month that is focused on a specific topic at hand. So if you're looking for a little bit more and you want to level up your own work, or you're curious about what I'm doing inside the Patreon, feel free to come take a look at that and try some of the content on for size. If you're a little uncertain about committing, but you still want a taste of what I have to offer, please check out my YouTube channel. I will post some retired Patreon content there every couple of months, along with a lot of free art journaling content. Art journaling is a huge part of my practice, play-based exploration, discovery with my materials all happens inside my art journals. And I have so much content over on my YouTube channel to help support you get a lovely art journaling practice started. You can also follow me on socials or drop me an email if you have any questions at all. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I want to thank you for your interest in my art and in particular in my teachings. And I want to wish you all the best with your own creative process.